Welcome back. Time for another amazing adventure today here. Let's take another trip on the California Labor Law Odyssey. A show dedicated to telling you more about the abuse and misuse of the 1,100-page Labor Law Digest. And how businesses like yours are being held up every day for minor violations. No chance to fix it. Threatened with millions of dollars in fines. Most of them are just quietly settling. From the man who knows more about this than anybody, the man who's been there, been hit, and said, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take anymore, formed an organization to fight it. Tom Manzo, founder of the California Business and Industrial Alliance. Welcome back.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning.
Good morning. You have just opened my eyes to an issue that nobody's talking about. Why is this such an unknown that we even have here in California, a unique thing called the Private Attorney General Act? When was this passed again?
Well, 2003, enacted in 2004.
And it essentially, maybe I'm overstating this, but it essentially, the state said what? Back then, we don't, because of budget cuts and because we're in a hole, we don't have the staff to go out and find and enforce labor code violations. We have a 1,100-page labor law code. So many of them in there, so many employers, so many people. We don't have enough bodies to do it. We're going to allow private employees and their attorneys to basically be deputized and to go fight these on behalf of the state.
Enforce the labor laws.
Right.
Correct.
And what it did is opened up a floodgate of lawsuits where any little minor, trivial, ticky-tack thing, mostly centering around pay stubs and
late lunches
stuff. Those are the easy ones to find.
Correct.
And if you've done any of these things, you put the wrong employee ID on their pay stub, gotcha. And
it could be anything. Misclassified safety incentive.
That was what you guys got stuck with, yeah?
Yeah, and the late lunch.
Lunches.
We had a flexible work schedule, so the penalty for having a flexible work schedule and giving employees a safety incentive was $1 million.
Wow. Now, you think, well, okay, it's not so bad. The employees benefit. The thing gets fixed, and they get a bunch of money to make up for whatever penalty. But most of it goes to the attorneys.
Yeah, most of the attorneys, then the state. And,
state gets a third of it because they've deputized them. They do nothing. They simply say, go forth and see what you can do.
They actually get more than that, 75%.
They get 75%?
25% to the employees.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
The first third, so if it's 100, well, let's make it an easy number, $300,000
right.
Settlement, 100 will go to the attorney, and then out of the 200, 75% of that is supposed to go to the state.
It can be negotiated or changed or whatever. But
well, it's not supposed to be, but that's how the attorneys have been abusing this law.
And then a tiny fraction is left over and dispersed among all the employees who may or may not even be aware that there was a violation, who may or may not even be upset that that somebody's employee ID was incorrectly printed, that one of the zeros was dropped from their address, or all these other myriad of minor administrative missteps that might make you subject to a fine.
Right.
And what amazes me is none of these, when they catch you in any of these mistakes, there's never an opportunity to fix it first, right? It's just an automatic fine,
yeah, absolutely.
And they multiply it by penalties, by how many employees you have today, by how many you've had for the last 4 years, and they hit you with this staggering amount, and they say these predatory attorneys, these slip and fall guys, these guys who prey off of this, walk in one day and say, we found it, we think here's the liability, it's massive, and pay up or we're going to sue you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And most settle.
So, that was the biggest reason that I decided to form our own organization. We wanted to really fight labor laws. We wanted to reform them. We wanted to
make people aware what's going on.
Aware. We wanted to start with PAGA, and that's how I ended up meeting our guest, Bruce Wick, who's going to be with us today.
And we certainly have seen abuses with ADA laws. We've seen him in workman comp. He's going to talk about contract. What happens to contractors and whatnot.
Bruce's expertise, he really understands the legislative side of things and what is happening with the state. And that's the one side that I didn't have as much experience with. And that's why we brought Bruce on. Because we hear about the stories and we hear about the law what are the legislators doing about it? What can they do? What can't they do? So,
welcome to our show.
Welcome
Bruce.
to our show, Bruce.
Bruce.
Thank you.
Wick from the California Professional Association of Specialty Contractors, CALPASC. Who knew there was such a thing? Tell us about this organization.
Well, we formed it about 20 years ago, a group of specialty contractors, those who are not the generals, do everything from grading, plumbing, framing, roofing, concrete, building structures and so forth. And they were having some issues with indemnification laws towards general contractors and developers and insurance problems. So we began with that, but then as various problems have unfolded that contractors had to deal with, we've just taken more and more issues on, and labor laws have become more and more a huge issue for our members to deal with.
In this state more than any other.
Absolutely.
Because we have a bigger set of laws. I keep saying 1,500, but I guess it's more like 1,100 pages
it all depends.
of labor law, depending on what you, how you classify it and decide. What, as he said, what size font, how many pages is going to spill over into. And so we have a lot of laws on our books. That's what California is unfortunately known for. And the I guess all of these, if you get caught, there's no fix-it. There's no grace period. It's a per se violation. It's a statutory violation, and therefore you're immediately subject to penalty. And that doesn't seem like that fits the intent of all these laws. Do you agree with that? The intent of these laws is for employees to have protection, and for employers to have some oversight and restraints in how they, some standards that they follow. If the purpose of the laws was to protect employees, how does the fine, my understanding, was there as a sledgehammer to get you to comply, Mr. Employer. But if there is no chance, once, I didn't know this is wrong, I didn't know I was supposed to be doing this, it's a minor thing, it's a major thing, it's whatever, but can I fix it first? No.
Right. It's rarely you're able to fix it first, and we've had a long-running conversation about this because on the one hand, they do want an incentive for an employer to do it right the first time. Right. And there are a small percentage of bad employers who have no intention of following all the rules, and they want to compete unfairly with legitimate employers. But legitimate employers, I mean, an 1,100-page labor code, are you going to do that perfectly all the time? No. And
you wouldn't even know what's in 1,100 pages.
Exactly, until somebody
points
it
out
up to you.
Yeah.
But you try and do the right thing. And what the legislature has tended to do is to say, well, if people aren't following the laws, these few bad actor employers, well, we need more laws. And we've always said, no, we need more effective enforcement of the bad guys. Don't penalize the good people who make an honest mistake
and who try.
Go after the bad guys.
Right.
That's where you can turn this thing around.
Okay, that makes sense, but that argument it's easier just to pass more laws. But if you pass more laws and can't enforce them, then what? That's where the state was kind of the quandary they were in. They basically said, look, we're broke when this got passed. We can't possibly go out and check. How many businesses do you think there are in California? You seem to have a number.
Around 900,000.
900. We can't go look at 900,000 and see if they're violating all these rather minute measures. So we're going to instead allow employees and their plaintiffs' attorneys to file class action suits whenever they find one of these things, and not just force them to change it, but force them to pay up. That's where it feels like it's a shakedown.
Right, because one other part of PAGA we haven't really talked about is an individual employee, and they're going to an attorney, and the attorney coming to the employer, and maybe they do find a legitimate issue. And in construction we have this, the foreman didn't fill out the paperwork correctly, and somebody says, hey, for the last 2 months, I didn't get some overtime or this deal, and we say, okay, hey, we owe you $300, and we say, here's your check. And the attorney says, we can file a PAGA on behalf of all your employees, so we want $20,000. And we have to go through this negotiation. A PAGA was never filed.
Here we go.
Here
we go with another new one.
Yeah.
But we have to settle a $300 deal for $2,000 or $3,000 because they have that leverage, they have that right, and the attorney just wants easy money fast.
Right.
So you have to make it enough.
And that's
so
not,
we have a
so
lot
it's not about fixing the problem. It's not
Exactly.
about enforcing the rules. It's about finding an
Shakedown.
exception
Yeah.
so that you can go and threaten them and it's easier to pay, like the phony insurance claims, like the slip and fall stuff at restaurants. I'm sorry to say, like some of these ADA suits and whatnot, where people are just going around trying to find violations and threatening you to go to law. And the penalties are so great, the cost is so great, the publicity is so bad, the time is so long. You simply say, pay the man. And that's
Right.
what extortion is, pay the man.
Exactly. That's what it's evolved to in many cases. And again, instead of focusing on the small percentage of bad employers who need to be dealt with, we're spending our time going after good employers for minor violations because they'll pay. They'll be forced
Now,
to pay.
doesn't this drive people underground? I mean, isn't this the anti-union argument that's been said for so long, that if in a world where union labor has so many rules and regulations and costs and whatnot, I'm just going to get somebody to pay off the books here. I'm just going to go get somebody to do this on the side and pay them cash underground.
No, it's not a union or non-union kind of concept. It really is. Most employers, whether they're signatory to a union or not, want to do the right thing, want to take care of their employees. And this small percentage that don't, how do you deal with them? So I thought I would give a little contrast today, because showing how the state government took a well-intentioned path and adjusted it over time and actually is doing an effective job at enforcing against the bad guys down one path, and then how this PAGA thing was well-intentioned at the start and has totally gotten off the rails.
All
and
right.
nobody's brought
Good.
it
See,
back.
I disagree. I don't think it was well intentioned.
And that's where, yeah, we'll talk about
We
that.
can debate about that. That's okay.
I-
Tom.
You know what? Let me just get one thing out in the open here really quick. Bruce, what's your title exactly?
Director of Risk Management.
So, Paul, let me just tell you this short story.
Okay.
So, we met and we had some coffee here at the Panera Bread because there's no coffee available here.
Oh, back to that old thing.
So I says, okay, let's cross the street. Well, where I want to cross, there's no light. And Bruce says, well, no, we're not going to cross here. Well, what do you mean we're not going to cross here? He made me walk all the way to the corner
Of course.
so we could cross at the
Because
light.
it's illegal. It's called jaywalking.
Well, he's risk management.
That's right.
Exactly.
Exactly. It
Thanks for
shows.
pointing
and
that out.
He
Appreciate it.
walks the walk. He not just talks the talk. He walks the walk. All right. So let's talk about this first issue you want to talk about. Explain this. That's what I was trying to get at. This. You sent us some notes here. Underground economy, state enforcement. Governor Schwarzenegger
It
established.
was actually Gray Davis that came up with this.
No, we're talking about the other.
not the PAGA.
No.
I'm still mad at Gray
Paga.
Davis and Joe Dunn.
I know.
Okay, we'll get there.
We'll
We'll
get
get there. Tom.
Let's talk about this other thing. You say, I never heard of this either, this Underground Economy State Enforcement, EEEC, in 2005, Economic Employment Enforcement Coalition. What the heck is that, and why did they put it in place?
Because there was an understanding that you had employees in certain areas being exploited by these bad actor employers.
Meaning that they're paying them, what, off the books, under the table?
A lot of cash pay, a lot of no overtime, a lot of unsafe conditions, those kind of things. Employers, again.
No rules, I'm just going to pay you off the books and quietly.
Right. And so they picked that. So they said, this is especially rampant in minimum wage type of environments, which restaurants, garment manufacturing, agriculture.
Right.
They also put into this concept construction, not because it's minimum wage, but because it's a higher risk. Workers' comp rates are higher, that someone who cheats on their workers' comp and cheats on taxes, in other words, paying cash to employees,
Right.
can underbid legitimate contractors. Most construction is competitive bid. So if somebody says, I'm not paying taxes, I'm not withholding taxes for the employee, and I'm not paying workers' comp, I can underbid you by 20%, and you can't compete
And
in
I'm going
that
to come.
situation.
I'm going to come clean. You're all going to vilify me now. I'm going to be forever shunned. But yeah, at my house, I had real painters, real contractors come, and they say we got real licenses. We assure our people are properly employed. They're legally here. They're et cetera, et cetera. They've got insurance and all this stuff. And then I had guys show up and say, "Hey, give me $500 and I'll just paint the house." And which one did I take?
The $500, yeah.
Of course.
And you'd be surprised how many large projects some part of that is actually considered, and that's what that's why this affectionately known as EEC coalition started. Again, well-intentioned, not to go after the good people, focus on where the major violations were taking place.
And that would be the violation. You're not going after the mom and pops, but you're going after people in bigger contracts, bigger companies that are still saying, we can avoid all the laws, all the protections, all the rules, all the everything if we just do this quietly underground off the books.
Right, or even small employers, because if somebody has 10 employees and they're treating them that way in unsafe conditions, we wanted to address that.
Right.
So the employers were behind this conceptually and philosophically, for the most part,
right,
in these industries. The problem was EEC started out, and they would do what they call sweeps. So they would say, okay, in this geographic area, I'm going to go to all the restaurants.
Right.
And what they found was only a third of the time would they find even any violation. And a much smaller part of the time would there be multiple violations, because this was a multiple agency group. It would be CalOSHA. It would be the Labor Commissioner's Office. In construction, the Contractor State License Board. So you'd go in inspecting kind of all of someone. And because you're just saying all employers in this area that are of this industry, we're going to inspect them all, 2/3 of the time they wasted completely with completely legitimate employers.
They found out that even though they perhaps could and others would, they didn't. They didn't pay people unfairly. They didn't put them in unsafe conditions. They didn't abuse them and misuse them and not pay them for overtime and other sorts of things. In other words, most people were complying with the law.
They did, right. They did everything right. And so they're wasting
resources.
The state personnel time, but they're also wasting the time because somebody, like at Tom's office, has to sit down with these people and
Clearly.
walk through all the documents.
At my old
show
restaurant,
them,
exactly.
Right, what they're doing, and at the end say, wow, good job, thanks, Well, why did you waste my time doing that?
Right.
So a third of the time there were any violations, and then a very small percentage of the time it was one of these bad actors.
So we'll move on to 2009, and you guys established some new level program.
Correct, because as the recession, especially in construction, hit 2008.
That was bad.
That was bad. And, a greatly diminishing market, and these bad actors who everybody knew who they were growing.
That's the key, really. Everybody does know. They know who they are.
Right.
Within your industry, because they've been, somebody underbid them or whatever.
Right. Anybody can mess up a bid one time, but 3 times in a row somebody underbids you by 20%, 8. But because the costs in California have gone up so high, what happened was these people weren't just leaving the money on the table. They were underbidding us by 20-25%. And still making a healthy profit. So the legitimate contractor is bidding things at cost or even under cost to keep the customer, keep the job, keep their employees working, and they're losing money. And the bad actors were actually gaining market share and making money because they just said, we're not...
So your idea, was this an individual proposal, or did this get put into place, this level program?
Well,
and what did it do?
This was our membership came to us and said, we're getting killed out here. We'd been talking about this for a while, and they said, you have to do something, right? So we went to the state government, we called a meeting with heads of each of these various departments and with the labor secretary and said, we're getting hurt out here, and you people appear to be very ineffective when we know who the bad actors are, or it should be pretty clear to you. And each department said, well, we do this and we do that. And they were all siloed. And we said, to go after the bad actors, you kind of have to follow
Silo
this.
Meaning that they were each doing their own thing.
Each doing their own thing. So you had a bad actor employer, CalOSHA, shows up and says, wow, you need to put shoring in that trench to protect your employees. They don't ask the employees, are you being paid cash? And they just leave. And this employer says, well, that fine is a cost of doing business.
So I checked one part of their thing, because each of these agencies is just overseeing one small piece of the pie. Right.
And you can cheat on every every one of these areas, right?
Right.
So we started our level program where we said, let's identify these people and try and get, multiple agencies to work together. And, we thought this EEC coalition could actually morph into this. And as we tried to get the state more engaged in this, then Governor Brown got elected. He appointed Christine Baker, director of the Department of Industrial Relations. And she is, from my opinion, the finest government employee I've ever
Wow,
worked
nobody's
with.
ever praised a government employee on this show before.
How about that?
How about that?
There are many dedicated government employees.
Because
I've
you
dealt
say
with.
she revamped this EEC that Schwarzenegger put in place and
Correct.
turned it into this labor enforcement task force.
Correct.
Well, I have spoken with her and met with her. She's a very nice lady.
Okay, well, let's get her on the show.
She would move people out of the way. In government, that's hard to do. She said we need to streamline this, and we need to take, some of these principles of you can target, because EEC, again, is wasting so much time. So
Yeah, it's a shotgun. We don't know who it is, so we'll
Right.
check them all. Now, how does she target? Is it using, you listed some things here, credible complaints,
Right,
analytics, data matching,
right.
to focus on the serial violators and bring them into compliance and justice, to red flag those who are doing this over and over again, and to achieve a better enforcement.
Right. Somebody reports $3 million in payroll to EDD and reports $500,000 in payroll to the Workers' Comp Rating Bureau.
That's the data matching, right?
Right.
Interesting.
Has
Yes.
reports $20 million to FTB because their contracts are all above board and they have $1 million in payroll. Well, you can't get it done for that.
Right.
So they would pull all these things together and then come out with this team and focus on these targets. And they have now gone from 33% of the time finding a violation.
Just randomly when they go out.
randomly. Now they're at 93%. And instead of a very small percentage having multiple agency violations, over 60% are multiple agency violations.
They're finding and red flagging the bad actors, and they're
Exactly.
more likely to find violations, and not just in one category, but many.
Exactly. And that's because you can't have the bad actor saying, well, it's just cost of business. If they show up every couple of years and I pay a $10,000 or $100,000 fine, depending on my size,
I'll keep doing it.
I'll keep doing it. They say, no, we're serious. And we're not only the group of us going to look at you, but if you're a true cash pay, they'll turn EDD onto an audit, and that's kind of a big game changer for most people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because
You think?
because now you have to pay taxes, and taxes are also something you can't bankrupt out of.
Right.
Owing the government taxes.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that.
So you're
before.
saying this, to me, sounds like a system that's working.
It is
A government system that's working?
a government system that was well-intentioned.
Well, you learn something new every day. Again, something new.
You never thought you'd put those words in a sentence together, did you, Tom? Yeah, a good intention. It was working, somewhat, and then someone came in and said, we can make this work much better. Went through the efforts of making that, and today, yeah, obviously there's more to do. They get better as they go forward, but this thing does really effectively, in all these industries, go after bad actors. It used to be bad actors, in a sense, you would hear them say, nobody ever gets caught. Well, now they know every year people get caught, and they don't just get their wrists slapped. They get seriously.
Because you're combining the
dealt with.
efforts of multiple agencies, you're cross-checking the data to find obvious, questionable people out there. They say in one form this, they say in another form this, and they get hit over and over again. You try and find and identify these people in a logical way, and then go and investigate them, and you turning up a high percentage, and not just a high percentage at one time. They're doing a lot of things wrong.
Right.
And that affects your organization how? Because you represent all these specialty contractors who are getting beat up by these guys because they're underbidding them constantly.
Right, because they're not doing Cal OSHA regs, they're not paying taxes, they're not paying workers' comp, and you add all those things together, again, you can...
Or other safety violations
right,
or other things.
you underbid, but you still make a real profit.
Right.
So they bring
Because
these
they're
people...
skipping all these things.
Right.
And the thing that I liked about it, the material you sent over, is that this multiple agency aspect, which is something you don't hear about. everybody operates on their own, bringing all the agencies together into a combined labor enforcement task force. This multi-agency approach gives these serial violators the basic choice of coming into compliance and paying previous wages and taxes, or getting out of business. Or you can find them and go after them if they don't want to do either. But it isn't like the PAGA instance where you go and find somebody who's had a violation, rightly or wrongly. There is no chance to fix it. There is no chance to correct it and avoid a fine, right?
Right.
And the good
very
actors
limited.
are becoming the bad actors, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is where the good people, I mean, we're saying, I don't want to go rogue. I don't want to try and compete with these people, deal with them. And we don't want to put anybody out of business. Hey, turn around, do it right, pay all your back, workers' comp, taxes, stay in business, that's fine, or we're going to shut you down.
Get with the program or get out.
Right. Right.
Now, all right, and that's what you would think PAGA was. But you say in your piece that you sent us that Governor Davis, who will forever be enshrined in the timely
We should get him.
offices.
Let's get him in the show.
Let's get him on the show. Why not? What's he doing these days? I don't even know what he's doing these days.
It'd be fun to see him and Tom Cross.
Well, that would be a lot of fun. All
He's
right.
probably robbing somebody.
Oh, come on now. Let's not. That's
Come on, Tom.
That's a perfect place for me to say this is not the opinions of OC Talk Radio, but and the guests
CALPASC.
are the correct.
Why does that always happen to me?
My goodness. All right, Governor Davis, Gray Davis, established the PAGA program, Private Attorney General Act, 5 days after he was voted out by recall. I didn't know that. This was his last gift to California before he left, huh?
Yes. And again, you can almost say there might have been some, idea behind this. Hey, we don't have, we have all these employers, labor commissioners understaffed, and so why don't we just, as, Paul, the term you've used, deputize
Right.
private attorneys and,
And their clients.
as bounty hunters, and they'll go out
Right.
and they'll do our enforcement for us.
Right.
And,
Sounds good. We're going to outsource government responsibility.
Right.
To attorneys?
Well, that's
So,
the problem.
it was, the justification they used was overdone. Wage theft was equated to a hate crime. It is not.
Say that again, because this program is based on several erroneous thoughts in both of your minds, and one of them is just that I've never heard that wage theft is equated to not just theft, but a hate crime as a whole nother category. If I
Not according to the legislators.
but if I hurt you in some way by not keeping you safe, by abusing you and using you, not paying taxes, other sorts of things, I get it. But that doesn't sound like a hate crime.
That's correct. But that was a justification they used, that there's a private attorney's type of act to enforce hate crimes. Well, that was the
I didn't know
justification
either.
for this.
So let's back up. So there is, explain that again, because 99.9%, I'm going to walk up and down the office building we're in, and I'm going to guarantee that nobody knows right now.
I think I've glazed over this one a couple times myself.
Yes, you
so.
can right now. If you hear somebody saying racist slurs and trying to incite violence and hatred, and standing on their corner, some KKK member with a bullhorn, there are private actions that can be taken to stop that.
Yes, and you should have Tom's attorney on sometime to give you the real detail, but that's the detail they came up with.
We can't catch and
in
find all
looking
these
at
people,
this.
so it's almost like you're deputized on the spot to stop them
Right.
or report them or whatever, yeah.
But there, the Department of Justice has to very much be involved, oversighting what they're doing.
Yeah, because you might, if they're screaming the Irish are all drunk, I might take that as a hate crime, and that might be a fact. I don't know. I'm Irish,
You do have some bottles of whiskey in
Yeah,
this
exactly. So-
studio.
Right,
So,
exactly.
So
Several.
So it was like they were trying to pull things out of the air to justify what they were doing, and that was quite a stretch.
So you're saying that the government, when they said we're going to create this new thing, this new form of deputization, where ordinary citizens could be called upon to find, ferret out, and enforce on behalf of the state violations, things that we thought should be stopped or checked. The only thing we can look to, well, we do this with hate crimes. Maybe we could do it with wage
theft.
theft.
Right.
It's in the sense if it's theft. If somebody's putting somebody's incorrect ID is a form of theft, though.
See, and that's the thing. That's not a theft. That's a mistake.
Right. That's
Wage
exactly.
theft is where an employer says, I'm supposed to pay you overtime. I know it, but I'm going to intimidate you, and I'm not going to do it.
Exactly.
I'm supposed to withhold taxes for you, report your income. I'm supposed to pay my matching and taxes on that. We're not going to do that at all. I'm just going to pay you cash. That's intentional. That is theft.
Right.
But
That's
all
what I'm
the
saying.
things,
It's a harsh thing to say every violation of the code is a form of theft.
Exactly. That's where all these innocent, inadvertent mistakes in the 1,100-page labor code. This is not.
You think there's a
wage
few
theft.
inadvertent mistakes in there? You think we got a few oversights?
So wait a minute.
think
From the
we got-
sounds of this, I'm not supposed to be paying Paul cash every month.
Shh, quiet.
Okay, you guys. We are on air.
That's
right?
why I underbid everybody else for this job. All right, so there was some theory they called upon that allowed them, if we can do it in one area, we can do it in another area.
Right.
But in effect, they're saying wage theft turned into another form of hate crime. It was equated. If it's so bad, hate crimes are so bad and so heinous, go look that word up, so awful, so horrible, that we can't just wait for the cops to go find them. If you see it, you're deputized instantly to stop this.
Right. So let's do this for every employer and
Citizens
and their
arrest.
employees.
Right.
Something like that.
Barney Fife.
Barney Fife. I'm thinking of Barney Fife. Citizens arrest. Citizens arrest. Remember that episode? I love that episode.
So, yeah, and the state also...
Go watch that episode. You want to see how absurd the thing gets. You know, everybody starts arresting everybody in town until everybody's arresting everybody, and then Andy in his wisdom has to stop it all here.
Well, that's a good point. It does get out of control when the state hands some enforcement, gives somebody technically a badge, and says, you go enforce this on our behalf.
More than 35,000 of them year to date.
Yep.
But the Labor
PAGA
Workforce Development Agency, another organization I never really even knew existed, that's supposed to oversee, they surely can oversee these effectively and make sure that
They have a PAGA unit.
that the town is not running around yelling citizens arrest to each other here.
Well, unfortunately, in both administrations, the Schwarzenegger administration, because again, shortly after Governor Davis signed this, he was his time in office.
Do you think we could get Arnold on the show? He
Maybe.
could tell us about it.
But
Maybe.
both of them, the agencies, had a lot going on, and
Not a lot of money.
Not a lot of money. Not a lot of personnel.
So there was some. It was an appeal to letting private citizens go out and find this, and the assumption was you're saying that the private attorneys will do what's best for their private employee clients, and that somehow this won't be abused.
Right. When they're acting on behalf of the state as a bounty hunter on behalf of the state, and the idea might have been, okay, you report your claim to the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, and maybe 80% of the time, 90% of the time, they turn it over to the Labor Commissioner to prosecute or investigate and find out if there's an issue, and they deal with it. But hey, the Labor Commissioner doesn't have enough personnel right now, so we're going to farm out 10% of these or something. The LWDA investigates through the Labor Commissioner less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Of all these claims.
They don't even. And they, as the law is written, this is why I keep saying it. Everybody just says shush and move on to something else here. The law says. I wish I could see the law. We got to get the law up here and enshrine it somewhere here. The law says, if I understand it correctly, that before this citizen's arrest, this deputy dog, this private employee and their private attorney can go forward and sue on behalf of the state and all the other employees as a class action suit in effect. Before they can do this, they have to notify this LWDA. Mm-hmm. We think we found one and we're going to go get them. And they're supposed to investigate it and say no, yes or no, thumbs up. They're supposed to give it at least some oversight and approval before you move forward. But because there's so many of them coming so fast, and the LWA is so underfunded and only has literally a couple of people reviewing 35,000, they don't even know that they got it until this grace period has ended, and the grace period should be, I would think, unless the state certifies that you can go forward, you can't. But that's not the way it works.
Well, in practicality, the intent, again, could have been that the LWDA can say, okay, whatever percentage of these, we had hoped a high percentage, they would turn over to the Labor Commissioner's office, who operates underneath this agency,
right,
and say, you go investigate.
Is this got some evidence, like a grand jury? Is there some reason to move forward here?
You know, hold on. I'm just doing the math in my head here really quick. I like doing the math.
You do.
So let's say there was 6,000 of these lawsuits last year.
Right.
Okay, so if there's 6,000 notices that went out.
To six people, or basically.
To 300 work days out of the year. Let's say 300,
all
right? You're talking 200 notices a day.
That's 6 people or 9 people, or how many people are supposed to review?
I think there's 9 in the PAGA. Is that right? Am I right with that?
And
how are they going to review 200 a day?
They don't, and they can't.
Right, and the issue is, and we might as well talk about it here, this is where the state said, well, we'll never get enough funding. We can't investigate these. But
Right.
Hold on, I'm sorry to keep jumping in, but you know the Walmart case was $65 million.
Right. For the lack of stools for their cashiers.
22 million went to the attorney, and I think another, was it 18 million went to the state? That was one case.
So you're challenging whether or not they'll never have enough money?
Yeah, hello. Well, where's the 18 million from Walmart?
Well, and
they had a party with it.
Yeah, so that's part of
they're building a train.
What CABIA's lawsuit
ouch, come on now.
is going to find out where
no,
that
they're building
money
a wall.
went.
Let's go there too. Yeah.
Because, and this is why PAGA should have been disbanded 12, 13 years ago.
Because the underlying assumptions turned out to all be wrong. Wage theft is a crime, but the state should be and is the appropriate enforcer for that crime, not individuals, right? There's one example.
Correct. And part of this is, shortly after PAGA was passed, we reformed how these state agencies are funded, because their funding was always subject to the, general funding of the state. It was up and down.
Right.
And we said, okay, and we were approached by the agency, said, we want more stabilization so we can do a better job. And we said, as employers, well, okay. So now...
Yeah, how do they predict how many people should be on or off? I mean, right now we're going through another government shutdown yet again on a federal level here. And here we are trying to anticipate, if you're an agency, if you're trying to do the right thing. I know Tom assumes they're not all trying to do the right thing, but if you are trying to do the right thing...
You know, I have to... Listen, Bruce, I'm sorry, but I have to interject. Because I'm working on... I'm gonna write a piece, a little op-ed.
Okay.
So here's a company, Timely Industries, been in business since 1971. Never had any problems.
You guys make doors.
Paid our taxes.
What do you do when you make doors?
Door frames.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I mean, we feel we've done everything by the book.
Okay.
Right. So we had late lunches and a misclassified...
Because of a flexible work schedule.
Yes. So it's $1 million. So now you have TSA workers protecting our
airports,
our traffic, our flights. They didn't get paid this week. Now, what would happen if we didn't pay somebody?
Right.
Right. And what makes me even more furious is the federal employees, the TSA guys who are not getting paid, and God bless everybody that's a TSA worker right now. God bless you.
Right.
Okay. Guess what? They can't file a PAGA lawsuit.
They
Why?
can't. Why?
Why?
I don't know.
They're protected federally.
So they're exempt from
exempt.
state law.
Exempt.
Well, I'll go one step further. You've said that
it shows you how atrocious this law PAGA is.
This might be a little conspiratorial, but some have even suggested that maybe why unions haven't jumped up in support of this more is because they, if you join a union as part of the union collective bargaining, can negotiate out. The employer can negotiate that. The employees can negotiate that away.
Absolutely.
That ability to file a PAGA lawsuit. So join a union, and therefore we'll wipe all these out.
You know what? I'm going to defer because Bruce will kick me under the table. I'll let him answer that.
He's fumbling right now.
A law was passed for the first time this last year that would allow construction signatory employers to do that, not any other industry, and that's subject to
Wait,
controversy.
are you saying that it's union
It's-
construction employers?
It's subject to controversy, but the point is that I want to make about this, why PAGA should have been eliminated a long time ago. In the mid-2000s, employers said, okay, to have stability in funding, we will tack a surcharge onto our workers' comp premiums if we're insured, if we're permissibly self-insured, to our payments, that we will fund the Division of Workers' Comp. We will fund Cal-OSHA. We will fund the Labor Commissioner.
And therefore, they can take this back on and do it themselves.
Exactly. So this year, fiscal in 2019, employers in California, as part of these surcharges, Tom's company is paying this too, will pay $938 million.
In workman's comp surcharges to fund the Department of Labor, the California OSHA, the Department of Workman's Comp, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct. And several funds to benefit
and therefore
workers.
they will have enough personnel to take this back in-house, and which is one of the contentions of Tom's lawsuit, the group's lawsuit, is why is this an illegal thing? Because the state government in this case is outsourcing their duty and responsibility to oversee these laws. They're letting somebody else do it, bounty hunters do it.
Right. So if they, and getting this money and not turning around and putting that into more personnel.
Right.
But even if they...
That was Tom's point. They got how many millions from the Walmart case. That didn't go back to help future enforcement.
Right.
God knows where that money... Where did that money go? Nobody knows. General
bullet train.
Bullet train. Right.
But if they went back to employers and said, you know what, to investigate these 6,000 lawsuits by labor commissioner personnel would probably cost somewhere between $20 and $25 million a year.
Okay.
Well, if we're already paying $938 million a year, we can find $25 million more if they actually need more personnel.
Right.
But you would not have as many. My argument is you would not have as many if they had to go to the state. Some employee is not going to go to the state and say, hey, guess what? I'm getting a free lunch from my employer. But I'm complaining about it.
That's true, but even if you said 6,000 complaints are legitimate to the point of needing investigation, we can easily fund the state doing
So the
its
underlying
job.
premise of why they farmed this out, why they went to bounty hunters, or why they went to deputized individual attorneys and individual employees, part of the whole rationalization is we don't have the money to do this. And you're saying the money is there now because of this surcharge on workman's comp that was there to fund that agency and all these others. Take it back in. The premise that led you down this path is gone.
Correct. Many years ago, they should have said, wow, this is being done poorly. It's being abused because clearly they're not oversighting it. They're not doing 50 or 70 or 90% of the investigations themselves. They're doing less than 1% as the state. So they're just letting these people run amok, and you're giving somebody a badge. And, you know, in the Old West, when you had one sheriff over, 20 square miles, maybe you needed to deputize some people with a badge and, go out and get the bad guy.
Right.
But to deputize you and say, hey, go find a mistake, and you'll make a lot of money if an employer makes a simple mistake.
And that's the key. That's where the abuse has come in. This hasn't been about egregious, horrible, bad things. They're finding minimum mistakes. Tom talks endlessly about this de minimis standard of the few extra minutes it took you to turn the alarm on and all this kind of stuff. And suddenly they're finally saying, that could be a cause for action. That could be something to go back. Incorrectly putting the employee's ID on the pay stub doesn't mean anything to anybody except there was a clerical error made. But none of these are allowed to be fixed. They all immediately, if you make an honest mistake involving something that minor, it can cost you a minimum penalty of like $10,000 per employee.
Correct. Those are PAGA penalties, and we just recently had a state appellate ruling where an employer missed by a couple of minutes every day on somebody's paycheck, and the average employee was owed over some period of time $30.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
The penalties.
I could buy a coffee for 2 shows.
Here, don't be snarky now here again. Go ahead.
The penalties, Tom, are over $15,000 per employee.
Oh my God! How many employees are involved with this? Do you know?
I think about 90.
So $30 equals $15,000.
$15,000 in penalties.
They were rounding it
What's
up. They
the
weren't
percentage
calculating.
on that? 5,000%?
And that's why
Yeah.
you go back and say, well, a labor commissioner personnel should show up and say, hey, you guys made a mistake. You've done a good job otherwise.
Right.
You know, pay up, pay them interest or whatever. But to have these huge penalties.
That's it. It's
behind.
But the
PAGA
penalty was
claims.
supposed to incentivize. Partly the penalty was there to make you in compliance. If you don't get in compliance, we're going to hit you with an atomic bomb. All right, I'll do it. But in effect, as you said, as we've created bounty hunters, it's created such a lucrative bounty that it's worthwhile for labor attorneys to run around, employment attorneys to run around and chase and find these things, to the point where they're trying to bring them out of the woodwork. Hey, come on in, we're having free coffee this week. Bring your paychecks, and let's take a look at all of them. Let's go hang out at the check cashing store and, hey, sir.
500. It's 500% markup on that. Right?
So it's created such a lucrative industry.
How could you have a penalty that's 500% of the actual amount that you would owe somebody? I mean, that is
a bit heavy.
The 2 penalties that were applied because they missed clocking what employees clock back in for lunch period. So even though it's only a couple of minutes, you aren't paying minimum wage for that time. So you have minimum wage violations each pay period.
Yeah, that's it. There's multiple violations they find in these things, and then there's a cumulative effect.
And then the waiting time penalties, because if an employee was terminated or left at any point and you didn't pay them for these couple minutes a day,
got to go back and find all them, and
then
there's
you
a fine
pay
for
them
that.
for 30 days of wages.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's just
say that again. If you
insane.
make a mistake and terminate somebody, and the mistake was found, even if it's as minor as that, they go back and get 30 days' wages, and it's not just for them, but per every employee.
For the $30.
Because it might have happened to them. It might have happened to them,
Right.
and we're going to pay them all just to be safe.
Right. And that's where the penalties are beyond,
Reason.
Right. And again, we understand they want employers to say, hey, if I don't do it right, I need to be very diligent and have an incentive to do it right, because it'll cost me afterwards some penalty and some interest or whatever. But the immensity of these penalties is way overdone, and that's where these PAGA attorneys have such a, leverage over the employer. That's why they can say, hey, you owe this employee, this single employee, $300, but I want $20,000.
I mean, the mafia. If you were to borrow money from the mafia, they'd probably be, 25%? I mean,
I don't know. You're Siciliano. You tell me.
I
here.
wouldn't know.
I mean, 500%?
Yeah. Is that the VIG? Is that what they call it? The VIG is 500%?
That is.
So you're saying that the underlying reasons for this system were based on false assumptions.
Correct.
That the economic conditions that the state said they can't enforce this have changed.
Correct.
And that in the process, by outsourcing this to private bounty hunters, basically, they've created such a lucrative business that it's being abused to such an extreme example that it's hurting businesses. It's not helping employees, because these are technical violations, not wage theft. Nobody lost anything. And in the process, has turned into a cottage industry for a select group of people.
Hugely. And I think what Tom and his
predatory
attorney group
right.
have really brought out is not just, for-profit businesses who have this as a real problem for them to deal with, but how many social service,
Salvation Army,
non-profit
Goodwill Industries
organizations
have similarly
Humane
been
Society,
hit. Yeah.
who by definition don't
Children's
have a lot
Home.
of personnel to go wade through the 1,100-page, labor law,
religious institutions,
and they're going to make mistakes.
Unions.
And all the attorney has to do is find one potentially disgruntled employee. So it's the suffering of all those folks beyond the
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 for-profit
threat
enterprise.
over for-profit businesses.
All right,
that
so why
is a
hasn't
problem.
it? The obvious question is then, if it was based on false assumptions, if the state now has the funds to take this back and enforce it themselves, why aren't they?
Yeah, Bruce.
You just made a very logical case to me.
I know. I
You
like it.
The argument I heard, let me see if I can summarize this. Okay, Tom,
Beautiful.
it wasn't all a bad-intentioned law. It had some, the state was broke, and they couldn't enforce this, and isn't that good? The state's going to outsource this to others to do it, and these people will be diligent, and they'll be incentivized, and they'll do a good job for the employees, and it'll all be great. And the state will have some oversight on this, so it won't get out of hand, except that the penalties are so huge that the predators came out of the woodwork and started looking for the minor violations that didn't hurt anybody except some technical thing. They took most of the money. The state took a big chunk of the rest of it, and very little was left. Very little was changed. Very little help was actually done. It was just a shakedown that authorized by the state, and basically isn't necessary anymore, even because the state's got the money now to take it back in and do it. So why haven't they done this?
Part of it is, as always, politics. There are those.
Who would, before you go any further, so who are the politics? Who's for this? There must be groups for this
If you look
that
at
like this.
plaintiff attorney firms, and again, there are legitimate plaintiff attorneys
Clearly.
who bring legitimate claims on behalf of
I
citizens.
hope,
and
I hope the vast
employees.
bulk of them are worthwhile.
They certainly are, but certainly there's another part.
Well,
and
yeah, the ambulance chasers, the slip and run guys, the guys that we've all had been in this.
The
You get
drive-bys.
the drive-bys, all this kind of stuff. They just show up and they say, "Oh, gee, suddenly you hit somebody in a car accident, and bumped into them, and now all of a sudden they've got pain and suffering, and they're claiming $10,000." And the I had one of those, and the guy, insurance adjuster, came out, looked at my car, looked at their car, said, "You couldn't have been going more than 10 miles an hour. There can't be any pain." And so the employee, but later on went to the attorney, and suddenly a day later, 2 days later, a week later, they got pain and suffering. He said, "We're going to fight this. This is clearly fraud." They didn't fight it because it was $10,000, and it would cost more than that to take it to court.
Right. So, in California, a lot of employers employ their workers and have them sign an employment agreement,
Right.
both union and otherwise. And oftentimes, in that agreement is they will resolve wage and hour issues by arbitration.
Clearly.
Because
We
arbitration
want to stay out of the
is-
courts. We think
Right.
arbitration is cheaper or whatever, although we could talk a lot about this. Interesting statistics on what really happens in arbitration.
Right. It's generally cheaper and faster. And again, what good employers experience is an employee says, your first notice isn't from an attorney. The employee says, "I think, you missed some time for me." And we go, "Oh, yeah, we did or we didn't. And here's your check." And, it's resolved because the employee knows, okay, if we can't come to an agreement, we'll just go to arbitration and get it resolved. And I usually don't have to pay anything.
Right.
We get it over with. So there's been a big back and forth, and there was a big federal Supreme Court case last year, Epic versus Lewis, that affirmed that Federal Arbitration Act overrides the state, and so those agreements are in place that keep an employee from filing a class action wage and hour lawsuit.
Although we did have somebody in here, I think it was from Fisher and Phillips, the big labor law attorney down the street here, and they said that's one of the things we recommend is that people sign in their employee agreement acts, put some sort of arbitration clause because of this case that you're talking about. But some others have argued, but that doesn't really prevent PAGA lawsuits.
Well, I'll just give you one.
Well, okay.
Oh, go ahead, Bruce.
Because we had a state court say PAGA removes the Federal Arbitration Act. An employee who has signed an arbitration agreement cannot bring a class action civil lawsuit, but they can bring a PAGA.
Because they're not the same.
Correct. Because of the way it's worded, and they're acting on behalf of the state, etc.
Even though it effectively is a class action suit, it's not classified as a class action suit.
Correct. It's a different set of procedures you
Right.
follow than getting a court to certify you as a class action. And therefore, the belief is right now under California law, if an employee has signed an arbitration agreement, they can only go through arbitration or file a PAGA. So that is why there's still, and of course the
An uncertainty.
plaintiff attorneys make high percentage contributions to legislators,
Right.
because they're not competitive bid. Whatever
Right.
they earn, they can pay a fair amount of it.
Right.
And
And they're all working on spec. They're all working on, they're all bounty hunters. They're all
Right.
working on what can I collect.
contingency there.
Right.
So that's why there is politically a belief of holding on to PAGA to protect employees who, so many of whom are bound by arbitration agreements from
It's
filing.
another way out. Now,
Right.
are unions pro-PAGA?
I will not speak for unions because every union may have a different opinion about PAGA or whatever,
Are chambers of commerce taking this issue up? I never hear them talk about. We have all the chambers in here. Not one of them ever brought up PAGA. It's something they're for or against, or something needs to be reformed or revised or removed. None of them. This isn't even on their radar screen of legislative issues.
CalChamber promotes any PAGA reform, highly supports arbitration agreements, but no PAGA reform bill will get out of the Labor Committee in either the Senate, State Senate, or State Assembly unless there is a compromise agreement with Labor ahead of time. There have been many bills.
Explain that. I'm lost at that. Why?
Because in the legislature, the Labor committees, as you know, we're actually 3/4 now, 3/4 Democrat.
Right. Supermajority.
Supermajority. So
One-party rule, right? As in many states around the country. In some states it's a Republican. Here we happen to have a Democratic
Right.
situation. We've become so polarized, and so whatever that the states are becoming single-party entities.
So in your Labor Committee in the Assembly, I believe there are 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans.
Okay.
So you would need to get a total of 4 votes to get any bill through that committee. So you've got 2 Republicans, you've got to get 2 of the 5 Democrats.
And the assumption is that they're receiving support from labor unions
and plaintiff attorneys.
and plaintiff attorneys. Those have been
and
two
so
groups
forth.
that donate a lot to the
Right.
Democratic Party, right?
So a bill comes before them, and they just vote it down, and it dies, quote unquote, dies in committee, as many bills do, for a lot of reasons. So, if you're going to ever do a PAGA reform, you're going to have to try and negotiate a compromise with, labor and
unions.
management together, and come up and say, how do we resolve this issue?
So, is the current PAGA law benefiting employees that their unions represent? I mean,
Say
is
that
it?
again.
Well, I know it's there to protect employees, and the state says we can't enforce this, so we're going to privately deputize others to do so. As it's played out over the last few years, have these PAGA reforms significantly protected employees, or have they mostly profited the bounty hunters?
I would suggest they mostly profit the bounty hunters because if you're a union employee, you can go to your employer, or you can go to your union, who can go to your employer and say, hey,
Right.
Take care of this, and employers want to do that. Other employees can go to their HR person or whoever and say, hey, I think you missed this, or I think I'm entitled to this. And
Right.
you have the discussion, they get paid. So it's this, again, few, the bad actor employers.
That's the one as in your original example,
That's
we're trying to
right.
not hit everybody. We're just trying to find the perennial bad, the serial bad operators, and we're trying to target them.
Right. And PAGA attorneys are not going to go after them generally because PAGA plaintiff attorneys who bring, the bad ones, or the
Bad
drive-by
ones are
ones,
broke.
as we talked about, because that employer will be out of business before they ever collect.
Yeah.
And they'll have a hard time.
So they're attacking the good guys, the ones trying to comply. In your previous example, we're spending a lot of time and money researching people who we find out are 75, 65% of the time in compliance with the law. Why are we wasting our time? Let's find a different system, as you outlined, that works better. We'll find ways to collect data and match data and justify not just an arbitrary way, but a logical way to try and ferret out the bad actors, the bad guys, the ones who are doing this over and over again. And we'll bring the combined power of all these agencies in, and we'll effectively either get them to reform or get out of business. All that is a logical sense. Why can't that same model be applied to the PAGA world?
Because those entrenched interests, the cottage industry you talked about.
Yeah.
And it isn't just the attorneys. You've got administrators. Once these claims are filed, there's a special administrator that has to be brought in to pay them.
On the Uber example, so that was $7.75 million, and 2.6 went to the attorneys.
Right.
3.6 went to the state.
Right.
More money there for that state group.
Right.
But $775,000 went to the people that cut the checks.
Yeah. Because suddenly you can't.
$750,000 to cut checks.
Because the assumption is we need a neutral third party to do this.
Yeah, and each driver got $1.08.
Yep.
And
what a benefit.
And there's not just the attorneys who are bringing these actions who have turned this into a cottage industry. It's got to be a boon for all business attorneys because there's now more work defending these things too. The last guest was saying, I got to pay my attorney more money now. I got to keep him on a permanent retainer. And as much as I appreciate that he's willing to fight for me and fend off all these attacks as they pop up, you can't help but note that the good guy attorney who's protecting him is making more money too.
The good guy attorneys and good gal attorneys who defend, from my perspective, this is the part of their job they don't like.
Yeah.
And there's enough business for them.
Otherwise,
and
if it went away, they wouldn't fight it. Right.
Right. It's like the attorney who wrote this lawsuit said, I hate this stuff because it's wrong. It's not litigation. It's not. I will defend my clients, but I don't want to be doing this kind of work for them. There's other work I can do that is more appropriate than having to defend these totally unfair, totally bogus lawsuits. An attorney, a friend of mine, he's involved a lot in reforming OSHA regulations. He actually is just down the street here. And he will say in a meeting, look, folks, you can leave that verbiage vague and obtuse, and I will make a lot of money on it, but it's wrong.
Yeah.
Fix it. And I appreciate that a lot of the attorneys have that attitude. I want to do real legal work, and this stuff is just
sleazy.
Yeah.
So can't we find some common ground then with the trial lawyers associations and the bar associations and everything? If they find this an uncomfortable, if they recognize it's being abused by a few, and they feel it's tarnishing their reputation and they feel sleazy doing it, can't we find a way to bring them commonly into the nest? And I guess that's what I'm saying. The same with unions. Unions themselves, he's talking about the United Farm Workers and others, they themselves, because they're also employees in their own organizations, have been hit. Surely there would be some room for common ground with all three to come forward and say, yes, let's revise this. Maybe let's look at the model you gave out earlier, which is saying working much better than the way the PAGA thing's playing out.
Well, again, you have politics and a few entrenched interests, and if attorneys who defend employers go to the legislature and say, you're abusing my employers, there's not much sympathy there. Right. Where the attorneys who claim to represent, exploited workers go and say, I'm taking care of them. Again, there's some really good ones that do that legitimately.
Right, and there's a sympathetic argument in this state that the assumption the employer is bad and the employees, I'm gonna be more sympathetic. But I'm going to the heart of it. You're saying what's standing in the way? You're saying, well, maybe trial lawyers and bar associations and unions and other sorts of things. But I'm hearing you saying you have to get a consensus of labor to sign off on this if you're going to get a bunch of Democratic legislators to move something forward out of committee. What's keeping that from happening? Because you're telling me the trial lawyers find this kind of sleazy for the most part. Some of them are profiting, but most of them aren't. And if they are, they don't care for it. And you're telling me that the unions themselves don't see any great advantage to this system and are therefore fighting to keep it in place. Who's fighting to keep it in place other than these I'll tell you my argument to the answer based on what I've heard over the last few months doing this show. I think there's just no urgency to do it because nobody even knows it's happening.
I think, Paul, that's a major part of it, and I am not speaking for unions and their perspective at all.
Yeah, no, I understand. Right.
Okay, and I want to confirm our defense attorneys. They'd rather not have to defend PAGA claims just because they're so unfair and so unnecessary. They don't feel sleazy doing it. They just feel this is,
it's a waste. Yeah.
Right. What a waste.
Maybe that's a bit right. Sleazy is a hard word. That's
right.
That's a harsh term. But I'm just saying there's no love of doing this stuff here. Yeah, they don't like it.
But part of your point that I think is really valuable, and that's where CABIA's place really is so important here, is if we have 900,000 employers in the state and nobody seems to have but somewhere in that neighborhood, and 6,000 PAGA claims are being filed a year. Well, there's a whole lot of employers, and when you say, hey, what about PAGA? And they go, what's a PAGA?
Exactly. Never heard of it. I never heard of it in 5 years. Never heard of it. Business owners come in every day. None of them ever complained about it or talked about it or alerted anybody about it.
Anybody who's had a PAGA claim goes, oh, my,
It's horrible.
Oh my God.
You can't believe it.
So that CABIA is stepping forward and saying, this is our centerpiece issue, and it's wrong, and it needs to be changed.
Reformed, right.
And you, Paul, are helping us get this word out,
right?
That this is a problem, and it needs to be addressed because, yes, the legislature normally wants to put out fires, and nobody's even yelled fire.
That's right.
Yet.
That's the point.
Right.
Nobody's even yelled fire. Their job is to deal with fires, not to go through and find all the things that could be fixed in the government. They don't have time to do that. They react to things that are burning hot right now. And this one is so cold and cool and operating it truly like the extortion analogy, where these shop owners are afraid to come forward and tell the police that they're being held up by crooks. I'm going to burn down your business unless you give me some money.
I think they would charge less than the attorneys.
The extortionists?
The extortionists.
Well, but the whole point is that unless that's what shocked me out of this. And again, we've talked about why people are afraid to come forward and say, okay, I'm an employer, and I just got convicted of a labor law violation. Nobody wants to come out and say that, or accused of one. But if they don't, and the fear that if I come forward, I'll make myself a target and everybody will start hitting me over and over and over and over again here. I get the fear of why they don't do it. But the effect is that nobody talks about this. And this abuse is happening regularly, constantly, and everybody is at risk. And that's the message. That's the fire that we've got to light under people here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where associations can be the standard
Voice,
bearer. As my association is for especially contractors, nobody wants to publicly complain against one of their customers, but I can.
Yes, right.
Right? And nobody wants to publicly complain about, a state agency, and have them turn around and,
oh, you want to complain about us? I think we'll find 5 other things wrong with you,
right.
Dirty rats. Yeah.
But I can.
Right.
And Tom at CABIA, on behalf of all California businesses, can stand up and say that PAGA is wrong. PAGA is unnecessary. PAGA is way overdue to be sunsetted,
reformed, reined in, removed,
whatever.
And
whatever
there are, because the argument you made today, which I think we've taken extra time to do this, a lot of extra time on this show, because this is a complicated thing. You're trying to lay out a tale of two cities. There was a law that was put into place and was improved, and seems to be working fairly well.
Yes.
To enforce other sorts of labor law violations or find people who are doing things to abuse or misuse or whatever. They're not following safety rules. They're not paying taxes. Not doing other things. And there was a what was it called? Labor enforcement.
LETF, Labor Enforcement Task Force.
Okay, that was put together to bind all the agencies in, pulled the resources, pulled their data, and they found rather than just sporadically going out looking, they found the bad guys. They focused on them, and it's working.
Right.
A similar model could be used for PAGA, perhaps, particularly since the underlying assumptions turned out to be real wrong of why this thing was needed and how it would work out. And the abuse is only growing.
Correct. That's exactly right. And that's why, the time has come to stop the abuse and either sunset the whole thing,
right,
find another way, or again, the intent is they want employees' claims investigated. We have
plenty of money to
plenty
do it
of
now.
money for the state to take that responsibility that was theirs from the get-go. And
how do
should
they
still
join
be.
your organization? How do they find, if there are specialty contractors out that don't know that your group exists, let's give a plug for you and then a plug for CABIA again here, starting with you.
CALPASC.org, CALPASC.org, our website. You can find more about us and contact us.
How many specialty contractors are there in California? Do you have any estimates? Or?
Licensed specialty contractors are in, I think, the 180,000
Hope
range.
they're installing timely frames.
Yeah, right.
But many of them are very, small
Mom and pop
operators.
Right.
Our members are more the production-oriented folks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you guys are a member of CABIA, is that correct? Or are you just here talking?
I'm
Supporting?
a part of what CABIA is doing because our
He's
members...
an ex officio.
Our members
How about
understand, we've talked them through how serious PAGA is, and so we're putting efforts and support behind CABIA because you don't need, 5 different groups
Yes.
pushing forward on this.
Too often that's what happens. Everybody...
Right, and we have splintered...
silos, just like you talked about.
Right,
Yeah.
so let's get behind CABIA and what it's doing on its lawsuit especially, and call, the state to task for not having reformed this long ago.
And CABIA really appreciates Bruce because he has been our voice of reason.
Yeah, well, let's see, because you tend to check and you're biting your tongue, you're saying all these dirty rats and the governor and all these people, they all had a bad intent, they're all bad actors. No, what he made was a whole logical assumption that this, like the other law, there might have been some noble ideas behind this. It might have made some economic sense, they thought, to farm this out because we can't do it. But the underlying assumptions turned out to be wrong, and the economic reasons are gone. So why are we still doing it, particularly when the abuse is growing and growing and growing?
Well, join CABIA. Join the change.
How do
Be
we do
part of
that?
the cause.
How do we do that?
CABIA.org.
And if you think that you only need to do this after the fact, think again.
Yeah, do it before. Don't
Yeah.
don't go through a PAGA lawsuit.
Please. Find out from others. Sometimes it's better. We all believe in learning from the experience of others on this radio station. We have so many shows where experts and people coming through real life examples. Don't learn the hard way. Don't learn by going through it, as these guys who come in here like Tom and his company have. Learn, be proactive. Support people so that together you can prevent things from happening to
PAGA
you.
prevention checklist on our website.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for coming in. I appreciate people for hanging in. This was a very technical one we wanted to walk through on a very slow basis, and this is much longer than most of our shows are, but it was worth it, I hope, for everybody. Tell the world about it. There is a thing called the Private Attorney General Act, and it's turned into a form of extortion that nobody ever envisioned. It's not working. There's no reason for it to be there. There are better ways to protect these things, and it's time people start speaking up and not only telling their stories of what happened to them, but